Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the New York Islanders. The Lightning with a second opportunity in a row to try and finish off this Islanders squad to go on and meet the Dallas Stars in the Stanley Cup Finals. And unlike Game 5 where they couldn't finish the job, the Lightning did manage to do it with a 2-1 overtime victory. And this game was very similar to the previous one that these teams just played. Besides the fact that the score was exactly the same and the fact that the game went to overtime, it starts off once again with an Islanders goal from their defense again, this being Devon Toews putting the Islanders up 1-0, and just like the previous game, it is Victor Hedman tying the game up for the Lightning, getting his 9th as he inches closer to the current playoff record for most goals scored by a defenseman, which is Paul Coffey with 12. So Hedman only with one more series left to do it, and to pass he would need 4. It's possible, but it'll be tough. Then no more scoring for the rest of the game before we would head to the overtime, and it would be Cirelli this time getting the game winner on the Lightning side and finishing off this series. Another part that was very similar was that the Lightning once again were gifted a 4-minute power play right at the end of the third period heading into overtime, and they were once again unable to capitalize on that. And now luckily the Lightning do end up winning anyways, so there's not really much regrets left there. But if the Islanders had won this game, this would have been a moment like in Game 5 to look back on and say, well, the Lightning had every opportunity to win and just couldn't do so. Luckily, we don't really have to talk about that at this point. On the Lightning side, the good news for them is things are going very, very well. Their defense here in the past couple of games, or their offense, I should say, has, struggled slightly, only getting 2 goals here tonight and 1 goal, though not for a lack of chances. They were once again dominant over the New York Islanders, just couldn't really bury much. Varlamov playing a very solid game up to the final point here, so definitely doing a bit of a comeback on that side. The defense for the Lightning continues to be very, very solid. So much has been said about teams' defense during these playoffs. The Golden Knights, the Dallas Stars looked pretty impressive during their series here in the Western Conference Finals. The Islanders, of course, were impressive throughout most of these playoffs with their defensive side, but the Lightning, not much has really been said about them, but they've been very good as well. That first round against the Columbus Blue Jackets, yes, the Blue Jackets don't necessarily have the biggest offensive threats, but still some solid D from the Lightning side. Early in the Boston Bruins series, they did struggle a bit with the Bruins top line, but definitely as we moved on later from Game 3 onward, the Lightning seemed to figure things out and just shut down the Boston Bruins from doing much of anything. And then here in this series, a similar thing occurred, so a lot of credit does have to go, of course, towards Victor Hedman, who leads the charge on the defensive side, but also to players like McDonough, Cernak, Bogosian, of course, as well. And of course, on the goaltending side, Vasilevsky continues to impress. Now with just 2 goaltenders left, him and Khudobin on the Dallas Stars side, it seems, I would say, that Vasilevsky certainly has the edge in that matchup. In terms of bad news for the Lightning, well, just like the Dallas Stars on the other side of the bracket, I'm not really going to focus on the bad news here. It's time for celebration. The Lightning, while they haven't been gone from the Stanley Cup Finals as long as the Dallas Stars have, as of course the Lightning were Stanley Cup finalists in 2015, it is good to see them here again, and not necessarily much of a surprise. This is a very, very stacked team. We probably should have seen this last season if not for that big choke in the first round, but seems as though the destiny for the Lightning was to get to the Stanley Cup Finals at the very least. On the Islanders side, things going forward are sort of a bit strange. I don't think it's actually bad. This Islanders team is very good. Obviously, making it here to the top 4 to the Eastern Conference Finals is extremely impressive, but let me just point to, those teams that exist in the NHL that are sort of, they're competitive to make a playoffs, but they're not really good enough to do really any damage. Obviously, the prime example of a team like this is the Minnesota Wild. The Islanders are sort of like that, but for the contenders, because the Islanders as a team are not particularly strong on paper, but they play at such an elevated level than what they're, sort of more than the sum of their parts style of thing, that they play at their ceiling at all times, which makes it so that they're able to beat these teams that you would think are better than them on paper, like the Capitals in the first round, like the Flyers in the second round. But what this does mean is that when they run into a team that just is better than them, even when they're playing at that top level, like last year with the Hurricanes, like this year with the Lightning, they just sort of run into a brick wall. With most teams that are contenders, there's a lot of variance in terms of how they play, and so a team like the Golden Knights can sort of just blow up and do extremely well, or a team like the Stars, like we saw in that Western Conference Finals, blow up and do extremely well for themselves. The Islanders don't really have that. They always play at a really high level. There isn't really a moment where you're saying, well, the Islanders could really break out and surprise people here. It just feels like there's very little variance to their style of game, and so it felt like once we saw early on in this series that the Islanders couldn't really compete with what the Lightning were doing, it felt as though the series was sort of over. And so as we move on later on into these years, unless the Islanders obviously change significantly in terms of their roster, I think this is a team that remains competitive as long as, of course, they stick to the game plan. It's possible for a massive fall off to occur, but I feel as though this is a team that remains competitive, but I just don't know if they ever really are going to be able to cross that line, because it just feels as though there's always going to be, a team, a couple of teams, 2, 3, 4 teams that are just one step ahead of the Islanders, and they're never going to really be able to defeat those teams. So I just don't really see how next year they take down a team like the Lightning or they take down a team like the Boston Bruins unless they improve significantly in the offseason. So for Islanders fans who are enjoying playoff hockey, that will likely continue. But for those who are maybe hoping for higher aspirations, I don't know if you're going to really get that. But that will do it for this recap. In terms of my prediction, unlike on the other side of the bracket with the Western Conference Finals, where I was completely incorrect, giving the Golden Knights the 5-game series over the Stars when the exact opposite happened, here in this side of the bracket, the Eastern Conference Finals, I was 100% correct, saying that the Lightning would win and that it would take 6 games, which indeed it did. Class dismissed.